All right. Welcome to the next episode of Eclectic Corrales. Today we're going to be talking with Rick and Mitzi Hobson of Milagro Winery and Alon Silverblatt of Silverleaf Farms. Mitzi, to start off with, can you tell us a little bit about why you and Rick decided to move out here and start the winery? What was the love of Corrales that brought you out of here?
Well, our story begins in about 1984, and we had decided that we would like to learn how to grow grapes. We had enjoyed traveling in the late 70s, early 80s, and decided that our next chapter, we wanted it to be something that we thought was purposeful. And Rick had grown up on a farm in southern New Mexico, and we knew that we liked to eat and we liked to drink, and we felt like it was a missing piece was learning how to grow grapes in New Mexico that could make really high quality wine. So we started looking for land, and we looked all over. We looked in the South Valley, we looked in Algodón, we looked everywhere. And the reason we picked Corrales was because Rick had a company that was located in Albuquerque, and our thinking was that Corrales had some nice farmland, and it wouldn't be too long of a commute for Rick to get to what he called his real job, which is what it was. It was his day job. And little did we know that was when all the traffic started to occur. So his commute ended up being quite lengthy, even though we hadn't really thought about that. So we looked for a long time, and we found this parcel of land. It was an 8-acre parcel. And so we just dove in, and every weekend, initially the land that we have the grapes on was filled with Christmas trees. And the city agreed to take the trees out so that we could begin the process of planting grapes. And so for months, every weekend we'd be out here with all of our friends and family, and doing the infrastructure of what was going to become the vineyard on Westella and Old Church Road. And then there still in our mind was absolutely no interest in having a winery. That came so much later. All we wanted to do was learn how to grow grapes. And then we started to bottle some of what we made. And ironically, right over our wall, a man moved in who was a wine broker in Sonoma. And we started doing informal little tastings where we'd put bags on over our bottles of wine, and we'd gather some of the neighbors together, and people started to think that the wine from Corrales grapes was viable. At that time we didn't realize Corrales had actually been a wine grape growing area before Prohibition. And so it got us to thinking that maybe we should consider becoming a commercial winery, but it still wasn't at the front of our mind. It was just kind of in the back of our mind. And gradually in the early days, we put some wine in a couple of competitions, and we just got enough feedback on the quality of the grapes. So everything we've ever done here, it's never been driven by making wine. It's always been driven by figuring out how to grow grapes. And as Rick will tell you, it was his desire was to not cut any corners and see what New Mexico could do. So do you want to say a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, we have a goal of trying to make wine, raise grapes, make wine that reflects the place they're grown, which is a common theme that you hear in a lot of places. But that's basically what we try to do. The first thing you have to have is grapes, of course, and we've had quite a learning curve on how to raise grapes. Our name is Milagro Vineyards, and Milagro means miracle in Spanish, and our name comes from a conversation that Mitzi and I had about how it's a miracle when we can get grapes to grow in Corrales. So that was where our name came from, and that's basically what we try to do. We probably raise 10 different varieties now, not a tremendous amount of any one of them, with the goal of trying to find out what might do well. So far, the grapes that we have raised have all produced varietally correct wines, and they hold their own in most places. So we haven't isolated any one thing, but we're still working on it, and that's...
I was just going to say the model that we it evolved, we hadn't really thought about it, was that we knew a lot of people in Corrales who had at least 1 acre of land, some 2, and they started coming to us and saying, well, we'd like to have a few grapevines. So Rick started looking at different plots of land, and like on the hillside, that was where he thought Syrah would like to live. And then other people were where he thought maybe Riesling would like to live. And so it became a collaborative effort, which enabled people living in Corrales to have grapes on their property. And at the same time, it was helping to keep Corrales to have a rural feel to it. And so right now we have around 16 different vineyards. None of them are huge vineyards, but they represent different terroir throughout the village, based on the soil and the property where the different people live. And the way it has worked is that we go in, we plant the grapes, we take care of the grapes. Rick keeps track of everything that goes on, and then at the end of the year, we buy the grapes and people reimburse us for the care of the grapes. And it's worked pretty well, but the one factor that has kind of crept up on us is that we're now in our 70s, and our bodies are aging, and so that was when we started to look around, and it didn't make sense to us personally that we wanted to sell what we had done. We felt like we basically wanted to just have it continued in a new chapter, and have new eyes and new hands look at the work that we had done and figure out, okay, how do we continue this so Corrales can continue to enjoy grapes and wine made in the village. And that was when our paths crossed with Alon and Aaron. And Alon can tell you how they grew up here, and it's been a lot of baby steps trying to see if there's a way we can, make this all work. And we all went to France together about 2 years ago, and spent time in Dijon, and the guys took classes, and so we're trying to figure it out. So maybe this is a good time for Alon to jump in.
Yeah. So this is Alon Silverblatt of the Silver Leaf. We'll ask you the same kind of questions, Alon. What brought you and your brother out here to Corrales, and what makes Corrales special to you?
Yeah. So my story starts in 1990, because that's when I was born. here in Corrales. Just down close to the river, down on the ditch is where I grew up. Let's see, so growing up here, we always were playing outside and probably took most of it for granted. But my dad would always plant a fruit tree anytime he would plant a tree or something that we could eat or cook or something later on.
Agricultural roots, so to speak.
Years down the road, and so on a good year in Corrales, if we don't have a late frost, when we were kids, we would start with plums and nectarines and peaches, cherries, different things from the garden, different vegetables, and eventually apples would come in and some other tree crops, tree fruit. And so we just took that for granted, I think. And then I went away to school. Aaron stayed here. He really started it as a backyard garden. He started Silverleaf Farms as a backyard garden, really a part of the kind of grow your own movement and getting into cooking and nutrition and self-sufficiency. And so whenever I was home for the summers from college, I would work with him. I remember when I was away in school, it was the longest period of time that I went without seeing the horizon. And out here, it's just these vast vistas, and I remember coming back, for fall break or something. It was like, Corrales was definitely home, There was a place that, you just grow up and it kind of becomes part of your blood of what home is and what that place is. Able to travel and eat all kinds of different food. And especially living in Europe, in the Balkans, I didn't speak the language. Right. But I did like to eat and I did like to drink. and the most important, that's like the most common language anywhere you go.
That's right. That's an internet. Food and drink are an international language.
It's so easy to connect with people over food and drink. And so I was really lucky. I got to travel all over the place and see all kinds of different things. And at a certain point, realized, wait a minute, I don't have to be in Croatia to have this experience. I love it, but that's not home. That's a vacation. So I said, well, we can do this here in Corrales. People have been doing it here in Corrales. Right. My brother was running Silverleaf Farms, on a much smaller scale. He's doing it. There's a lot happening here. Why do I have to be on the other side of the world?
Right.
Just knowing that the food and drink community, everyone was here to help support each other.
Right.
And I think that's really important, that we weren't going to let people fail and they weren't going to let us fail.
Well, that's a community spirit, which is part of what Corrales is. It's tough to do in Albuquerque because it's a much bigger place, but in a small place like Corrales, it's just wonderful to see everybody come together and support everybody else, so that everybody,
really
somebody's having a hard time, you make sure that you help them as much as you can. But before we leave, Mitzi, you wanted to mention something about your dog rescue.
Yeah, okay. Part of the vineyard and the winery from really the beginning, even before we were a winery, we had a pig that lived in our house. His name was Wilbur, and he's on our wine label. And when you get to be a certain age, you look at your DNA and you think, well, what is it that I care about? Well, one thing I care about is animal welfare. And because we have the land and, we could afford to do it, it just always made sense to me that was a way we could give back. And so our giving back started as a pig sanctuary when the pot-bellied pigs were popular back in the 90s. And then when that fad wore off, I got a 501c3 around dog rescue. And specifically, the name of it is Milagro Boston Terrier Rescue, but we actually do all dogs. We do anything that crosses our path. And we do about 60 dogs a year. We find homes for them. And this is how that has changed during COVID. people are hanging on to their dogs because they're lonely. So we're not having the dogs up for adoption, but what has happened is people can't pay to keep their dogs. So the role the rescue has played, we're treating dogs for cancer, heartworm, a number of different things. We're just writing checks to vet clinics, and we've always done that, but during COVID, it's been, our expenses have been 3 times as much that. And I suspect when COVID subsides, I'm hoping people don't give up their dogs, and then we'll be back again at adopting dogs a lot. So anyway, it's just a core value of Milagro Vineyards and Winery, whether it be dogs, pigs, whatever. We're just interested in animal welfare.
That's
Kind
great.
of
That's
goes
great.
along with the grapes and the wine.
Yeah.
Thank you for letting me talk about
You're
it.
very welcome. You're very welcome. Well, thank you all for your time and your effort and your stories. They're great stories, and we wish you best in your collaboration. Hope that works out well. And thanks for your time.
But people have a tendency to think that, well, it's wintertime and there's not anything going on in the vineyard. And that is so far from the truth.
Yep.
We start in the middle of December doing what we call pre-pruning, which means we prune away all the excess growth and things that we don't want to keep. And we leave the positions with a single cane and leave it long. And I can show you some of that out here. Because when the vine starts to grow, it starts out on the end. It pushes buds out on the end first, and then works its way down to the arm. And eventually we're going to clip the cane off and leave 2 buds. But there's a delay of a week to 10 days from the time it starts on the tip till it gets down to the bottom. And we have late spring frost here, so we can delay the bottom 2 buds coming out that we want to keep for a week to 10 days. So this is a technique you use in frost-prone areas, and frost-prone is one of our biggest problems, late spring frost. So if you look at this grapevine, you might think that it's looks like all others, but to us, it's all ready to go. We try to have positions, a cane, at kind of a hand in between each one, and this one kind of works that way. So these canes are left long. As I mentioned, the vine will start growing. It'll start pushing buds out on the tip and work its way back down. Eventually we're going to snip it off here, but we can delay these bottom 2 buds from coming out for a week to 10 days by leaving the cane long and let it start out here, and hopefully that'll get us by the last spring frost. So these are all cleaned up, and you can see where a lot of the cuts have been made. And all down the row, we've spent since middle of January till the end of February doing this kind of work. The other thing that we end up having to do is clean up all the debris in the vineyard. A lot of insects like to hang out and overwinter in the leaves and things. So we've been trying to clean the vineyards up. And then the next thing is soil amendments. So by the time we finish soil amendments, it'll be time to come do the final pruning, and everything starts to grow, and any planting of new vines that we have. So there's a cycle that happens, and there's not any idle time when you raise the grapes that go into your wine. When the grapes get ripe, well, obviously you pick them and there's work in the winery, and there's little work in the winery all along, but there's always work in the vineyard, so it all meshes together.